Adians, did the Roman Empire come in your thoughts of late? Slow her down. How many times do you ponder over the Roman Empire? Once in a week? Once in a day? Hell, are you doing it now? Anyway, make yourself comfortable, since we are going to talk over gladiators, emperors, and a lot of swords and sandals. So you better stick until the end, because of this great fact that will shock you all. How money drove the rise and fall of the world's greatest empires. Indeed, throughout history, empires have gone up and down. Empires have been among tackling wicked problems. Money is often doing this. Like British Empire and Roman Empire, countries spent their resources searching for wealth and other resources, which brought about wars that reshaped the earth. In this video, we will see how the reasons for wars were in one way or another fueled by money, whether dealing with geographical locations, taxing the subjects, trading or controlling resources as in all empires. In the end, we will understand that the quest that emerged as a means of acquiring power rather helped in bringing down these great empires. Economic causes were crucial in the expansion of the Roman Empire apart from the mere hunger for power. Roman army conquest meant that more and more resources, which were vital for reproducing both people and armies, were acquired. For instance, Augustus Gracchus resettled his DNA molecules to military marks such as the Egyptian grain fields, which came to supplement the area's agriculture to feed growing city populations, mainly Rome. Also, wine was commonly exported from the Iberian Peninsula, which consisted of gold and silver producing mines. More raw materials were required to make currency and pay soldiers as well as sponsor public works. War and conquest were a primary means through which Rome enriched itself. The spoils of war, loot, slaves, and tributes from subjugated peoples were key contributors to the Roman economy. In fact, military campaigns were often driven by the prospect of capturing wealth from neighboring regions. Generals returning to Rome with plunder bolstered both their personal fortunes and the state's treasury. However, this system of plunder-based wealth accumulation wasn't sustainable in the long term. As the empire expanded, so did its need for administration, defense, and infrastructure. Maintaining such a vast and diverse empire required immense resources, from building roads and aqueducts to supporting legions stationed far from Rome. As these costs mounted, the burden on the state grew heavier. To cope, the Roman government increased taxes on its citizens, particularly the peasant class, who were already struggling. This heavy taxation drained local economies and made it difficult for small farmers to survive, leading to widespread economic distress. Inflation also became a significant problem. The Roman government began debasing its currency, reducing the amount of precious metal and coins to stretch its resources further. This practice led to rampant inflation, eroding the purchasing power of Roman citizens and destabilizing the economy even further. As the financial system weakened, the social contract between the state and its citizens broke down. The economic strain contributed to broader societal issues, including political instability and social unrest. The empire's reliance on slave labor, for example, stunted technological innovation and left the economy vulnerable to disruptions in the supply of new slaves from conquered territories. As Rome's ability to conquer new lands diminished, so did its ability to replenish this critical labor force. At last, the economic model of the Roman Empire turned out to be deadly. Seldom has empires grown so fast due to military conquest and gaining new resources. Then the expenses so as to preserve such an empire from external threats, in addition to the internal flaws about the economy's structures, set in motion the backward movement. The fall of Rome was not only due to external factors such as barbaric invasion, as well as internal factors such as rottenness of politics. It stemmed from the internal collapse of the empire's economy, productivity downturns, including the empire expansionism and other empires' expansionism that were unable to be supported on. The British Empire at its zenith was not offset by the British Empire, the spans across the continents, a degree which housed almost 1/4 of the landmass and population in the entire world. An all too common indulgence of such an empire is its pestiously exercised dominion, which begs explanation: the rise and the quest of the Empire Manea. Like it was with the Roman Empire, the British Empire imported and occupied foreign lands with excessive amount of natural resources for the purpose of developing and more so servicing its greedy and would-be growing populace in industries. Economic motives were at the top of political expansion of Great Britain. India, famously referred to as the jewel in the crown, was perhaps the most lucrative colony in the empire. Its vast resources, including cotton, tea, and spices, were essential to Britain's economy. The East India Company initially established control over Indian trade, with profits from the colony feeding directly into Britain's economic machine. India's raw materials were exported to Britain, where they were processed into finished goods, which were then sold back to both Indian and global markets at a significant profit. This cycle of resource extraction and industrial production epitomized the economic structure that fueled British imperialism. The Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in the late 18th century, supercharged the empire's economy. Advances in manufacturing, transportation, and technology allowed Britain to produce goods more efficiently and at a greater scale than ever before. The empire's colonies provided a steady supply of raw materials, from Indian cotton to Caribbean sugar, feeding the factories in Britain. In return, the colonies became captive markets for British goods, creating a highly profitable system of trade and production that further cemented Britain's global dominance. Control over key trade routes was equally critical. The British Navy, the most powerful in the world, policed the seas, ensuring that Britain could maintain its control over international trade. The strategic acquisition of territories like the Suez Canal, Gibraltar, and various island outposts ensured that Britain could dominate key global trade corridors. This naval supremacy allowed Britain to protect its economic interests and secure the flow of goods between its colonies and the motherland. Nevertheless, the economic well-being of the empire turned out to be a double-edged sword. Managing such a huge empire, both in terms of its military and administrative structure, had very high costs. Particularly, 2 world wars strained Britain's coffers in an unprecedented manner. The First World War, 1914 to 1918, was very exhausting for the British economy, as it had to borrow extensively from the United States and dramatically increase its debt. The international conflict also created problems such as destabilization of internal markets and reduced British colonial revenue. World War II, 1939 to 1945, was even more lethal. Britain won the war, but came out of it in ruins. Financing the war activities, repairing the damages, and controlling the colonies turned out to be too much. In the first few years after the cessation of hostilities, Britain was burdened with large debts, high inflation, and lack of food supply to the isle. The empire was in no position to support its outstretched limbs. Neo-colonial national movements became rampant in the colonies. India, the crown jewel of the empire, gained its independence in 1947, signaling the beginning of the end for the British Empire. Over the following decades, one colony after another either negotiated independence or was granted it, as Britain's financial situation made it impossible to maintain control. The Suez Crisis in 1956, where Britain's attempt to regain control of the Suez Canal ended in humiliation, further underscored the decline of British global power. Ultimately, it was the financial burden of maintaining the empire, exacerbated by the enormous costs of 2 world wars, that played a major role in the collapse of the British Empire. While political movements, changing global attitudes toward colonialism, and military challenges were significant, the inability to sustain the economic demands of empire ultimately forced Britain to relinquish control over its territories. The empire that had once seemed invincible crumbled under the weight of its own financial strain. Trade routes were another key factor that fueled both the rise and fall of empires. Controlling these routes allowed empires to regulate the flow of goods across regions and rake in huge profits from taxes and tariffs. For instance, the famous Silk Road, which connected the East and West, was a lifeline for many empires, including Rome and later the Mongol Empire. But as new routes were discovered, especially the maritime routes during the Age of Discovery, older empires that relied on land-based trade began to suffer. The Portuguese and Spanish empires, for example, used their mastery of ocean exploration to dominate global trade, altering the balance of power. The Spanish Empire is a prime example of how wealth can both build and destroy an empire. Spain's conquest of the Americas in the late 15th century brought vast amounts of gold and silver, especially from the mines of Potosi in Mexico, making Spain one of Europe's wealthiest and most powerful nations. This wealth funded Spain's military campaigns and fueled its global dominance in the 16th and 17th centuries. However, the influx of precious metals caused severe inflation, known as the price revolution, destabilizing Spain's economy. Instead of investing in domestic industries, Spain became overly reliant on colonial resources. As the productivity of the mines slowed and costs to defend its empire grew, Spain's financial system became increasingly fragile. Multiple bankruptcies weakened the empire, and by the 19th century, Spain had lost most of its colonies. In the end, the very wealth that had built the empire contributed to its collapse, much like Rome's fall due to financial mismanagement. Few aspects of imperialism were as important as monetary policies, how empires managed their money. To the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th centuries, the British Empire and the German Empire competed, not only for the wealth of surrendered colonies and their natural resources, but primarily for markets. Such commercial competition was important for the outbreak of the Great War, as empires sought to prove their supremacy over one another in terms of wealth and power. But the price of warfare has always been tragic. The following First World War imposed severe financial strain upon empires that included upon Germany and Tosudanese empires, never able to recover from such collapse and the economic and geographical void that followed it. Overall, most of the reasons for rise and fall of empires can be linked to the search for more. No matter whether it was Rome needing resources, Britain wanting to monopolize trade, or Spain grasping for gold and silver, their reasons were financial and therefore spurred the empire's growth and decay. These historical lessons are useful even in the present day. Even in the present world, money is at the center of several wars, and still more, the emergence of another superpower. History has shown us that even though money creates empires, it can also undermine them if it is not well preserved. And that's the story of how money has driven the rise and fall of empires throughout history. Thank you for watching, and remember, what we've learned from the past can help us understand the financial forces shaping our world today.